Today on CityCast Chicago. This Thursday, 6 of the nation's finest poet laureates will gather to perform at the Harold Washington Library, including Chicago's first ever poet laureate, Avery R. Young. Earlier this summer, I sat down with Young just as he was writing a poem for Chicago's Juneteenth flag raising. We hear what he came up with, and he tells us how Chicago inspires his work every single day. It's Wednesday, September 6th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about.
To all that is Juneteenth, Friday, June 16th, 2023. Maybe along with this flag in this plaza, or them firecrackers popping off in North Lawndale and all them other freedom festivals out west, over east, up north, and out south, maybe along with all of this, we should remember to rest. For what is an emancipation without a backyard just to sit and wonder about that 40 acres and a mule?
We are sitting here with writer, performer, educator, visual artist, and activist, and Chicago's first ever poet laureate, Avery Young. Avery, welcome to CityCast Chicago.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You sitting in the library right now working on a poem. What does that creative process look like for you?
Oh, it's right now. Tomorrow you got to read something. Get it together. Get it together, dude. Get it together.
Do you start with a theme? Do the words kind of just come to you? Like how do you find yourself when you're writing some of your best stuff? How does that inspiration find you?
Well, this particular poem is an assignment. So I have kind of like the rules and talking points already worked out for me. And this right now, the poetry process or the process in writing a poem is just to creating a map, get me to and through those points.
Maybe along with this flag being raised in this plaza and all of these dignitaries in their distinguishment and the people parading amongst the poetry and posts, maybe along with all of this, we should remember to rest so that we can rise. For what is a celebration for an emancipation without a resurrection of a new direction, a new policy that feels more like protection?
I mean, when I come to your work, when I think about like your book, for example, Neckbone, it's so much more than just like poetry in like traditional stanza form. There are pictures, there are lyrics, right? There are little inscriptions. You know, for you, what is poetry?
Poetry is all those things and much, much more. The point of the Neckbone was really to present poetry as art or an art form. I think somewhere in the sauce it got lost and people think of it as this kind of just really academic, dense collection of words that you got to be real deep or smart to understand and get into. But at poetry's most simplest form, it speaks to people because it's the voice of people, you know? And what is happening in Neckbone is me being very transparent of the way in which the poem enters my brain and show all the words as they come and how they come.
You know, you've spent years not only writing poetry, but teaching young people this art form, mentoring young poets in Chicago. You were driving when you got this news that you were the first ever poet laureate. What did that mean in that moment?
We had to pull over. It was just special because like I had just had lunch with Eve Ewing, who was like my niece, you know, and we were just talking to her about the poet laureate, and we just and we wasn't necessarily saying I was going to be a poet laureate or she was going to be the poet laureate. We're just like, well, whoever's going to be, we got to support and rock through it. And it just so happened to be me. I was like, wow.
I love that you said we're going to have to show up. We're going to have to rock with them, make sure we helping them through.
And then it was me. And I can help me. I can show up for me. You know?
Well,
It ain't really hard to do that. Ain't really hard to do that part.
I mean, we've had such a great fortune here at CityCast to sit down and share some of the poetry of, some of Chicago's greatest working poets right now. What do you think makes our city scene so unique?
When you live in a city like Chicago that is like a hub for blues and gospel and hip hop and dance and all of these vibrant culture, why would like the poets pop just like everything else? Yep. You know what I'm saying? With the streets spill poems or poetry every day, be it of the triumph or the trials of the avenue, right? It's still spilling over with poems every day. I could walk outside and go, okay, there go a poem I'm gonna write like tomorrow, and turn around and say, oh, that's a poem I got to sit down and stop and write right now. But it's popping. The poetry of the city is linking community, right? Mm-hmm. The whole purpose of Louder Than the Bomb, when folks sat down and thought about that joint, was not just about a space where teens can read poems. It was about a space where the act of teens reading poems about what they're experiencing in their life in the streets will reshape the thoughts that people have about teenagers who they are just looking at and thinking, oh, they shiftless, playing about nothing, or even more concerned that they're dangerous.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, you mentioned Louder Than the Bomb, which is one of the largest youth poetry festivals in the world.
I'm sorry, Louder Than the Bomb is now rooted in radical. I must make that distinction.
Where are some other spaces that you see poetry flourishing in the city?
Other spaces where poetry is flourishing in the city was always been flourishing with Kumba Links, which is an organization that ran up north. One of the cool spaces that's happening right now is Soul Restoration with Dina Dean and Celeste. That's intergenerational. I'm thinking about the work that I'm doing with the youth over at Rebirth Reborn, which is just workshops and preparing youth for the AXO and other competitions outside of the Teen Poetry Slam. Man, there's so much happening, but I would like to see poetry outside of poetry venues per se. Mm-hmm. Right? I would like to start seeing poetry on billboards. With Jay Ivey winning this Grammy Award, now you're going to get a bunch of poetry records. Because people are seeing something happen and they're like, okay, I'm going to do this.
But you want to see it proliferate, like you said, off the page, outside of the coffee shop.
Outside the shops and all of those things, and end up on theater stages, end up on the billboards, on like, there should be a poem on a real big wall as you drive it on the E-way. I'm really excited about moving poetry from off of its typical or traditional places and putting it inside of spaces that people don't necessarily think about it. Because poetry is everywhere. People don't understand it. Poetry is everywhere, and poetry is accessible. And it's not necessarily, again, about just you sitting somewhere and reading this like long soliloquy or a sonnet. Poetry is just a dance with language. Just things that you say, just phrases, that should just be out and about.
Wait, are you gaming? On a Chromebook?
Yep. It's got a high-res 120Hz display, plus this killer RGB keyboard. And I can access thousands of games anytime, anywhere.
Stop playing.
What?
Get out of here.
Huh?
Yeah, I want you to stop playing and get out of here so I can game on that Chromebook.
Got it.
Discover the ultimate cloud gaming machine, a new kind of Chromebook.
Can you remember when you realized that performing or teaching this art form was going to be such a huge part of your life?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I always go back to my experience at Oak Park River Forest High School, teaching in Miss Belpedio and Miss Graham's class. First day, first time ever kind of teaching a poetry residence, and there was this brother by the name of Eugene Allen. What's up, Eugene? Eugene was sitting in the classroom like with his whole head in the collar of his shirt. Like he was just like up in that book. Wait, hold on. He was up in that book like this.
This man had just put his head, turtled himself all the way in his jacket right now, hood
I called
over.
him the Ninja Turtle. Yeah, the great black Ninja Turtle. That's what I called him. And he was all up in that class like this. And like when I started talking, his head popped out. And I was like, ding, 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 ding. I got it. I got this. If I can get, and every time I'm performing, I'm always thinking who I can get their head up out of their shirt. And there's been many Eugene Allens. There's been many people who sit in classes and sitting in audiences who were kind of skeptical of what was about to happen. But after I do my thing, they okay, I rock with you, my brother. I rock with you. And I'm like, cool.
I'm here for it.
I'm here for it. It's giving. It's giving all the things. Yes.
If somebody, wanted to try their hand at like a poetry open mic, do you have a suggestion of somewhere they might go?
The library, a bookstore, read. Read first. Find out what you like, who you like, what poetry resonates with you, and then begin to do the work that moves that type of work forward. And then when you get into a poetry venue, you then present their work like you really, 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 really care about it. And anybody that's listening should really, 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 really care enough to listen to what you got to say. And that's what I suggest.
I actually think that works in both ways too, because if you look at some of your favorite libraries, some of your favorite bookstores, look at their event calendars, they're likely hosting poetry nights, likely hosting workshops, likely hosting open mics. I know the Silver Room, for example, is one of my favorite bookstores in Hyde Park, and they are constantly hosting open mics for poetry, for comedy, for storytelling every single week.
The fact that you called the Silver Room a bookstore is gagging me.
Hey, that's where I'm getting my books from. But you talked about the process starting with reading,
yes.
right? To find those voices and those poets that inspire something inside of you. Who are those Chicago poets for you, past and present?
When I picked up I Am the Darker Brother, which was an anthology, I was immediately drawn to the work of Sonia Sanchez. And it was Sonia Sanchez then that led me to the work of Baba Haki, who at the time was Don L. Lee. And as far as Chicago is concerned, and language and what I think I'm doing, he's probably one of the most influential, poets that let me know we got to work on page. It just can't work on stage. You got to work on page. Like if you're not around to say it out loud, it got to do what it's doing. It's got to be given what it's given. Carolyn Rogers, Mama Angela Jackson, who is the current poet laureate of Illinois. I'm coming for you, Angela. I'm coming for that spot.
That's the most Chicago response.
I'm coming for that spot. I'm coming for that spot. What's for, Let me get done when I get do it over here in the city, then I'll be downstate.
You talk about West Side. How does that? How does Austin, right? How does your Chicago lived experience show up in your work, whether it's visual art, whether it's poetry, whether it's music?
How can it not? That's what I'm saying. How can it not? There's so much that I absorbed as a young person growing up, walking on the avenue where there's a liquor store and a storefront church and what Big Mama used to call the drunk house, the tavern, and another church, right, and another, and the restaurant that's bumping GCI or whatever they bumping, coming back home, and Millie and Mahalia Jackson playing. One playing upstairs, the other one playing downstairs. How can I not walk through the streets of the city and not absorb all this stuff? Well, that's what I did. That's what happened. That's what happened. A lot of people don't, but there's things that happen in Chicago that give Chicagoans a certain language, mouth sauce and hawk and all those things that you put into the poems, or that I put into the poems, because the poem is talking to people. The poem is in conversation with people, and the most immediate people to me are other Chicagoans.
Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, the goal of the Poet Laureate is to also grow poetry across Chicago, to make more programs, to create access for young people across our neighborhoods. What is your vision to use this position to, as some would say, further weave poetry deeper into the fabric of Chicago?
Well, I want to invite young people to write poems together. So during the summer, we will be responding to a poem in the One Poem, One Chicago. That's Gwendolyn Brooks' Blacks, her book Blacks. And we'll write poems together. I got this from this big grandiose idea I had when I was working with 3 different schools. And I was like, well, I'll just have them write a poem together. And they were like, that'll never happen. I'm like, yeah, it can. I can rock with them, and I'll have every last student write their part to this one long epic poem. And so that's what I want to do with one of the programs that we're going to do with the youth in the city. I want to also invite poets and musicians to create a work that will be presented locally and internationally. Again, like I said, poems off of the page or presented to a theater house. Write a libretto for an opera. This is consider commercials. Consider taking a poem and making it a screenplay and getting it produced on Netflix or whatever streaming services. Like, you just don't have to be a poet. Mm-hmm. Right.
No, I mean, that's one of the things I appreciate so much about some of my favorite Chicago poets is just how multi-hyphenate they are, right? They're musicians, they're professors, they're activists, they're comic book writers, right?
Yeah.
And so it's one of the things I've always admired. If people want to incorporate poetry into their day-to-day, what would be your advice?
If people want to incorporate poetry into their day-to-day, they can do a number of things. One, they can read it. Just make sure you read and ingest in poetry. And you don't necessarily, even in these days, you don't necessarily have to read it because, like I said, people have albums and all the good stuff. Aja Monet, Jay Ivy, Emerald Green. It's a bunch of Harold Green. Got a children's book out. It's so many ways in which you can
grab Tubman from Avery R. Young.
You grab Tubman and you can hear those things, or a neck bone. And then the other way would be to then take the time or make the time to write it. I was just telling Binky, the work don't get done unless you do it. You got to take the time and make the time in a day to write it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a whole poem. And I've heard Mama Nikki Giovanni say the same thing. Like, sometimes she write 2 lines and she move away and live some life. And she come back to the poem and write 3 or 4 more lines or whatever and move away. Sometimes the thing is not necessarily about sitting down and getting the whole poem out, but sitting down and getting something out. So them are the ways in which you can incorporate poetry on a daily basis. Listen to it, read it, or write it.
Avery, I appreciate you making time for CityCast Chicago. We're going to let you go, let you get back to finishing your assignment, finishing your poem. Because again, you Chicago's first Poet Laureate. You got work to do.
I got work to do. And I was just in it too. I was in that good part. I was like, oh, gotta go talk.
Maybe, along with this flag being raised, we should pause and ask for healing. Healing for neighborhoods, healing for children, healing for weary minds, healing from feeble bodies, healing from broken spirits. Maybe, just maybe, we should just ask for the wind to move us forward and up. Maybe this commemoration of an emancipation should heal us free, not by words, but by deeds. Maybe this day, maybe. Thank you, you all.
You can see Avery R. Young perform alongside other Poet Laureates at the Harold Washington Library, including Iman Lauren, Angela Jackson, Nandy Comer, Era D. Matthews, and Amanda Johnston. Before I let you go, some good news. News. The 79th Street Renaissance Festival is this Saturday in Auburn, Gresham, and it's turning 18. Enjoy carnival games, great food, and a performance from Anthony Hamilton. Nearly 20,000 people are expected throughout the day on 79th and Racine. As always, we appreciate you for listening. Subscribe to our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago, at chicago.citycast.fm. And please, let us know what you think are the best Chicago rivalries at 773-780-0246. I'm going to talk to you bright and early tomorrow. Peace.
The fact that you called the Silver Room a bookstore is gagging me.
Hey, that's where I'm getting my books from.
No, I got nothing but love for Eric and everybody over there. They're my peoples over there at the Silver Room bookstore. But that ain't what I think of a bookstore. But yes, you can get books.
I agree with you, though, but you can definitely get books there.
And wait, hold up. And you know what? They ain't got not one neck bone up in that mug. You hear me? So we gonna really talk. It ain't a bookstore. The poet laureate is spoken. And when the neck bones get up in the store, then I say, ding, 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 Silver Room is a bookstore.